go ahead and get started. It is wonderful to have all of you joining us today. You are in the Understanding Your Community Demographics webinar presented by the Missouri District. And I'm pleased today to have Pastor Joe Rodriguez with us from St. Stephen and Liberty. My name is Mike Wadley. I am with Lutheran Church Extension Fund. I'm the Missouri District Vice President. And so I am excited to be part of this effort to educate you on demographics and what we can provide as the LCEF. Thought we'd take just a minute here and kick it over to Pastor Joe to introduce himself, and then we'll move right into the presentation.
Yes, and thanks, Mike. I've been here at St. Stephen's since 2006, came as a vicar. And as part of that presentation, we talk about demographics a little bit. And so that was kind of my first encounter with the Lutheran Church Extension Fund. But throughout my entire ministry here, we've had a lot of overlap, whether it was with stewardship or something along the lines of that we've been engaged. And St. Stephen has really benefited greatly from that, whether it's been through demographics or the more recently, the ministry clarity process that we've teamed up with. And it's just been very helpful to make sure we're diving into the things that we're talking about today. So I think that's why I'm here.
Great. Thank you, Pastor. Well, we will go ahead and I'm going to share my screen here. We'll move right into this presentation that I have about demographics and understanding your community. So what we're going to walk through today is really an effort to understand your community, how demographics fit in, and then how you can use the information that you can gather from different sources to expand your ministry throughout the community. We'll start by talking about really who you are as a congregation, who is your community, and then work with you a little bit to identify the needs in your community and approaches that you can take to meet that. So who are you? What is your vision as a congregation for the future? What are you good at? What do you do well in ministry? What is an area that you have the resources for to reach out into your community and make a difference? Those are things to really consider. When we talk about vision, it's something that actually a lot of congregations have not spent a lot of time exploring. I encounter congregations from time to time that have not explored a vision for their congregation, even a vision statement in 30, 40, 50 years. It's interesting. I worked with a high school, a Lutheran high school recently. The last time they actually explored their vision was in 2005. And if you think about that, the iPhone was introduced to the world in 2007. So to not explore your vision as a congregation and how you fit into your community with that vision, what you're trying to accomplish in ministry as the world has changed, you really, if you haven't done that recently, I would encourage you to start there. Next, you need to understand why you want to do this sort of effort. Why do you want to make this effort to understand your vision, to impact your community, to grow your congregation? It's important to understand that church these days is not like it was in the 1950s and 60s and before, but ministry so often takes place outside of the four walls of your congregation. So understanding that and then how your vision fits into that and strategically mapping out ways in which you can approach your community is incredibly important. What is your niche? Again, we talk about a little bit, this comes out of the vision process. What is it that your congregation does really well? You can look at the congregation numbers and determine, hey, we really do a great job working with young families or maybe folks that are a little bit older. That's right in your wheelhouse. It's important to understand that so that you can really focus in your resources on what you already do well. And then finally, what is your competition? Competition, I don't necessarily mean First Baptist Church down the street. Competition really applies to what is the competition for expanding your ministry? What is the competition for ministry in general at this point? You know, so many youth are involved in activities such as sports that occur on a Sunday morning, for instance. So when you consider that about 20% of the US population is in church on a Sunday morning, competition is not necessarily the church that's right down the street. Competition is really based on what is competing with the members' time in your congregation, and those that that you would like to involve in your congregation's plans for expanding the ministry. So the next thing to really understand is who your community is. Now, we can help at LCEF by creating a demographics report for any congregation in the state of Missouri. There is no charge for that. It's a service that we provide for free for any congregation or Lutheran school, and happy to do that. And so we'll talk a little bit here about what the demographics involve. Of course, demographics reports often refer to hard data, such as socioeconomic factors. So when you see one of our reports, you're going to get information on income, marital status, family structure, education levels, and then the trends for those areas, not only in the specific demographic region that we're looking at, but how does it compare to both national and state trends? So you might figure out by looking at the demographics report that your area is the income is growing at a much faster rate than the rest of the state. And that's important for you to know as you consider how to impact the community. We can provide these demographics either as a drive time or a radius, and I'll show you examples of both of those. And then one important feature that we do include in the demographics reports, especially from a radius standpoint, it's called a mosaic. So each demographics report will provide about 10 different top mosaics for the area that we run a demographics report for. A mosaic is basically an identification of a group of people that is probably the more dominant trends in your community. So what it does is it summarizes and kind of encapsulates all of that information for you to review, and then start to pinpoint exactly where you might want to hone in as you look to expand ministry. I'll give you an example. So this is from a demographics report that I ran for a church in New Melle, St. Paul's in New Melle, which is in St. Charles County, so a suburb of the St. Louis metro area. I ran this report and presented it to the congregation to demonstrate to them that their area is actually changing in several ways, and they were quite surprised. Many of the folks that attend this church that is, 150 years old, they are second or third generation members. And so they're not necessarily aware of all of the things that are changing in that area. And so as you can see, what I did was I pulled information out of the demographics data and tried to summarize for them, as I would with any congregation that I meet with, what is going on in terms of trends, average age, and then also what is happening with the population. So you can see in this area, the population has grown by 7% versus a statewide growth of only 1.4%. The folks in the congregation didn't realize that it was growing that rapidly. This is an area, as we work through the demographics, that we identified as a population moving in that is well educated. They have a lot of wealth. They're often professionals, so chiropractors, engineers, physicians. Many of the areas out there that used to be farmland are now being sold to residential developers. And the developers out there are turning those into 3 and 5 acre home lots. So it's a much different area than the rural area that many of the congregation members and their previous generations had experienced. So it was interesting to share this with them, and it really redirected their focus a little bit in terms of understanding who they're communicating with, and that there are different ways to communicate with them than what they have done in the past. So you can see some of the data on here. We have family incomes. We talk about the family structure. So 65% of the population is married. Education, 40% of the population has a bachelor's degree or higher. And then that white collar profession, 71% of the population is employed in a white collar profession. So you can see it's a changing area for sure. This is an example of, as I indicated earlier, we have the ability to run demographics with a drive time or a radius. We can create shapes throughout any community to try and pinpoint where people are coming from. What I often do with this, though, is run a drive time map to demonstrate how far people may be coming to a specific church. So this is a different St. Paul's. I don't just run demographics for St. Paul's, but this just happens to be a different one. This is in West County in St. Louis. The drive time on this is, as you probably all know, we are a much more transient society than we have ever been. People are willing to drive 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes to attend a church that they appreciate their outreach into the community that fits their family. And so understanding that people may come long distances is important. And when you look at a congregation like this, that is actually right on a major interstate, it can pull people from pretty far out. So 15 to 20 minutes to get to St. Paul's de Pere on a Sunday morning is not a problem at all. People will happily make that drive. Here's another example. This is actually a radius map. So, and I'm going to flip back and forth between these two. So if you look at the northern part, just above Creve Coeur, that's 5 miles. And then if I go back to the drive time, you can see how much farther up the reach can go just on a 15-minute drive through Creve Coeur. So there's quite a reach there. However, the radius map, unlike the drive time map, will give you the mosaic tiles that we'll talk about in just a minute. So that's important to note. I do like to provide both maps just as a graphical representation of where people might be coming from, but it's important to understand the features of each. And this is where we can get really complex and complicated, but it is a great opportunity to understand where folks in your community live. So each one of these dots on this map represents a family, a member family at Timothy Lutheran in Blue Springs. The green shaded area is a 10-minute drive time, and the red shaded area is a 20-minute drive time. What's important to understand here is you see pockets where people live. So as you start to consider ways in which you can impact your community, if you start to feel some success with that and feel like you're really making inroads in the community, if you look at other pockets where members live throughout the community, it's a great opportunity to set up an ancillary site for folks to continue that same impact and ministry that you're doing right around the church. It's also interesting to note how far people are willing to drive. So that red is a 20-minute drive time, and you have a significant number of parishioners that are driving well over 20 minutes to get to church on a Sunday morning or throughout the week. One thing this won't do is it will not tell you how much each one of those families should tithe. So I just want to make that clear. That sounds funny, but I did have a congregation ask that. No, we cannot tell you what the household income is for each specific family. All we need to actually plot, though, the congregation members is just an Excel file. If you give me an Excel file with just the address, city, state, and zip code, then I can go in here and I can plot these for you, and you can see where everyone in your congregation lives. So let's spend a couple of minutes talking about mosaics. Again, the demographic mosaics are going to be readily available with the radius demographic reports, not necessarily the drive time. So it's important to note that. Experian actually plays a big part in these demographic reports. Most of you probably have heard of Experian from a credit reporting standpoint, consumer credit reporting standpoint, but they are a major data analytics organization. And so they collect quite a bit of information from the consumers that they work with, and they analyze all that, and they put that data into mosaics related to specific demographic pinpoints. So they use more than 300 data points to create these mosaics. And as you can see, they've been selected as inputs to the classification on the basis of their coverage, quality, and consistency. And then there's a lot of emphasis on the accuracy of the data variables. So making sure that they can really pinpoint specific pieces of data from a wide range of human characteristics. Let me give you an example of a demographic mosaic. So this is again from St. Paul's in New Melly. This is a mosaic. This is actually their top rated mosaic. It came out as a picture perfect family. So what you would notice if you received a demographics report, it would list the top 10 mosaics in your area. There would be a PDF link that you can go to the Experian website, and then you can pull up what each of these specifically mean. Of course, picture perfect families, that looks like a picture perfect family. So as you boil this down, and I summarize this for the congregation, I'm gonna walk through the summary briefly, and then I'm going to show you what the report would look like if you jumped into the Experian website. So picture perfect families, they're established families on the go, living in wealthy suburbs. That actually matches the demographics that we saw. Wealthy households. They're well educated, as I mentioned before. There are a lot of professionals that live in that area. It's a changing demographic, and so we have a lot of professionals that are well educated moving into that area. They're pragmatic mobile users, and this is a point that's important. As you see when I show you the actual mosaic itself, it will give quite a bit of information there about different channels that you can use to reach folks in this demographic. What are they comfortable with in terms of, do they use their mobile phone quite a bit? Do they use Facebook, Instagram? And so it will kind of detail that for you. So you might consider that as you look at ways to reach folks in your community. And then they live comfortable lifestyles. So these are folks that are not living paycheck to paycheck. They're well educated. They're quite comfortable with where they're at in life. And they're large households. So this is the actual report that you would see that I pulled out of the information that I shared there, just to kind of summarize it. You can see that all of this information jumps right onto that summary screen. If you look on the right side, you can see the channel preferences. So, folks are heavy Facebook users, email, a little bit lower, television, maybe not so much. So that gives you an idea of how you might approach and communicate with folks and what their expectation is in terms of the best way to reach them. They're from a technology adaptation standpoint, they're ranked as apprentices. Talks a little bit about home ownership and then the age of their children as well. So a lot of good information from there. As I said, each demographics report on the radius side will give you a total of the top 10 mosaics for your specific area. So let's switch gears for just a minute and let's talk about the second piece. So you have the demographics, you understand the data. Now, what do we do with that? How do we put that into a situation in which we actually want to start reaching out into the community, using that information to figure out how we can expand ministry in your community? So what we recommend is actually sitting down with community leaders. And you can see we've got a list of community leaders on here, actually spending some time with them in an informational interview session. And I recommend doing this a couple of times a year with these folks. If you look at the people on here, they are heavily involved in the day-to-day family issues facing a community. They're well aware of issues related to addiction, homelessness, clothing needs. So they're quite they're on the front lines of those things. I often say that a third grade teacher is probably the most pointed when it comes to understanding what's going on in their community, because they're dealing with families at all different levels in society, and dealing with the issues that they face, not just in the school, but from a family standpoint too. So having these conversations, not just relying on the demographics to say, okay, this is who we should be working towards, appealing either our congregation services to, or focusing on the community. You've really got to get out there and you've got to spend some time with the leaders in the community. Here's some interview questions. When you sit down with those folks, when you sit down with the mayor or an alderman or a school principal or police chief, it's important to ask these questions. And I would encourage you, as you go into these interviews, to have a completely open mind. We all have perceptions of what's going on in our community, but the perceptions often don't match reality. In the area that I live in, St. Charles County, we have a homelessness issue. We have a lot of homeless people there, but they're not readily seen. You have to, I know they're there. We go out and we take a census of those folks every year. We understand what their needs are. We're working in the community to help them, but it's not readily visible. You can't say the same thing about, let's say, San Francisco. The homeless problem in San Francisco is readily apparent. So both communities have an issue with that. It's much more prevalent and in some communities than it is in others. So go into these interviews with an open mind and let the leaders that you're speaking with really direct you to where the issues are. So the first question I would ask is, what are some of the most pressing needs in the community right now? Let them speak to that. They're gonna know. They're gonna know what the issues are, and they're gonna be able to share that with you. And then your job really with this is to take a lot of notes, and we're gonna get into really with the next couple of questions, how things have changed and where the gaps are. So the next question you're going to ask them is, what have been the most significant changes in the community population in the last 5 years? We have a lot of changes going on in communities all across our country right now. We have, because of COVID, lots of folks have moved to other cities. We have lots of immigration in our country. And so it's important to understand that the community that you live in may have drastically changed in the last 5 years, simply due to those two things. And so again, going in with an open mind and let them tell you what is going on in the community and how that has impacted the services that they provide. And then we want to start to drill down into the adequacy of the following resources: food, clothing, low-income housing, child health care. You're trying to figure out where the gaps are, where the seams are that you might be able to help as a congregation. Again, if you remember at the beginning of this process, I tasked you with understanding what the vision is for your congregation and the resources that you have available, so that as they start to name things that they have problems with in the community, either a lack of food pantries or child health care problems, that those might be areas, if you have resources in your congregation that can help fill those gaps, this is a great way of learning about what those are. Next question we're going to ask is related to gaps, and you're going to point blank ask, what significant gaps are there in services provided to the community? As communities change so rapidly, as has occurred in the last 5 years, services that were provided 5 years ago may not be as needed today, but you might have other problems in the community that the government and social services, schools, other community leaders cannot keep up with, or they've identified, but they just don't have the resources at this point to fill in those gaps. So this is a great opportunity for you as a congregation to step into that. And then finally ask, what is the one thing that your church can do to help families in the community? Let them tell you what they need. That doesn't mean that that's an opportunity for you to make promises that you're going to fill in the gaps and that you're going to do what they need. but it is important to understand what the resources that you have are and how that might match up to what is going on in the community and where those gaps are. And so let them lead that conversation. Don't make promises. Take that back to the congregation and have a conversation about how you might be able to fit into those areas. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pastor Joe to talk about how he's used demographics and community involvement in his congregation.
Yeah, and I think, Mike, that's a great segue. Because like a lot of these programs that work with demographics and help congregations get visions and stuff like that, one of those questions that, is a good question to ask is that if your congregation disappeared from the community, would anybody care? What would be, what would be the big hit on that? And so that was one of the things that St. Stephen figured out through our demographic studies. And, thankfully we had a preschool that was hitting that, and we'll get a little bit more to that, right away. So, yeah, so I came to St. Stephen as a second career pastor. So I was out of the business field. And so one of the things that we had to do was an evangelism module. That was one of the things that Concordia Seminary St. Louis was requiring of all vicars to do. So that was my first experience with, the Lutheran Church Extension Fund, their demographics. So I mean, that was part of the process. You had to do it. So I got the demographic, and it really told me, or gave me pretty good insight as to what was going to happen here in our community over the next, 15 years, because it does projections on different things, growth and those sort of things. And I was a deferred vicar, so we were hoping that things would work out, that we would stay here in Liberty. And sure enough, it turned out that would go that route. So that was my first look at that, to just help me, formulate what did I want my evangelism project to look like. And we had vicars, I think in 13-14 and 14-15, and they did the same thing. They used those demographic studies. And at that point, we had already, had a vision in place. So they were able to capitalize on one of those types of things. Like one of our vicars did he did an ice cream social that was connected with our preschool. And the other one did a Dave Ramsey course. He taught the whole Dave Ramsey course, which again is another one that hit our demographics. So when I got into it a little bit more, and again, I want to encourage people that you don't have to go this alone, right? So Bill Geis at the Missouri District would be happy. He works with Mike all the time, right? On how do you help congregations get going on these sort of things. And so one of those projects that we did was, a Seasons of Discovery is the thing that I got plugged into. There's a lot of them that are out there, but that's just the one that I had got plugged into at that time. And one of those things that they do is they start to look at demographics on, what is it that you're going to target? How are you going to target? What are you going to do? So the day that, we did a lot of prayer walking together, and we did a lot of things building up to that to get the congregation's heart, kind of like what you were saying earlier. Who is St. Stephen? And what gets us excited about ministry? What does those things? And so it formulates those steps. And we went through that process. And then on our visioning day, we got to look at those mosaics like you were talking about. So we had like 5 mosaics that we were looking at that were above average for, our community. So we knew that we had a plentiful group of these particular people. That mosaic that really stood out in 2013-14, when we did our vision thing, was the babies in bliss. And where were they? Well, they were already coming to our preschool. So it made it really easy to tag on to that. And we formulated a vision, and we started working on programs that would help meet the needs of that particular group of people. And we came up with a big vision. We had a lot of tasks to accomplish, and we worked on it hard as a congregation, saw fruit from our work, and really checked off everything that was on that list. So that was kind of a fun thing to do. Now, towards the end of that whole thing is when we went into the pandemic. So that's why we process with the Lutheran Church Extension Fund again, just to kind of get us refocused and centered in again. But demographics is really driving those sort of things. The other thing that I think sometimes we miss out on in doing that too is that demographics can also, like the mosaics, can also help us know the heart of our congregation too, because we did have a lot of people in our congregation like to serve in different ways. And so then that also helps us to add programs at St. Stephen that is meeting the demographics that are currently present at St. Stephen. So if you have a particular mosaic that loves to, you know, serve at a food bank or something along the lines of that, then you can create programs where you can do those things. St. Stephen is not in a location where we would have our own soup kitchen or something along the lines of that. Not that that's a bad thing or a good thing. Um, Babies and Bliss, it's still one of our number one mosaics that right here at St. Stephen. And as I always like to remind our congregation, God loves them all, right? So
Right.
the moms that are dropping their kids off for preschool and then they're going to do yoga or do their thing and then pick them back up, stay at home moms, Jesus loves them too, and we can serve that particular group well in that way. So and then also having worked with that, with a community of other brother pastors, just to see them, it was kind of fun to see some of them working through some of the things that you were talking about earlier too. So for example, one of our guys that was on the other side of the city down in Olathe, Perry Suchstorf, he did the prayer walking, and what they discovered around their church is that the sidewalks were a mess.
Mm.
And they had handicapped people and older people that had to be walking on these sidewalks, which just were not safe. And so that ended up with him where he would have, a monthly get together with the mayor of his city. And they talked about, well, what do we need to do? How do we meet these needs of the community? So I thought that that was a pretty good, connection
Mhm.
with leaders and, connecting that way too. So another thing that came to my mind, I remember in that process, there was a congregation that was centered, and they had a very high population of single moms. And so the guys of the congregation built a garage, and they would change oil and like fix headlights and those types of things once a month. And they would offer that to the women that were in that particular area, single moms. And the other one that I thought was really kind of interesting is that one church had done this, a demographic study, and they did discover that they had an entire homeless community that was a mile away from the church that they had no idea even existed there. So very
Wow.
similar to, kind of like what you were talking about before there. And the one thing too that, a lot of our examples and things that we talked about, and I remember at one of our E2 conferences, um, one gal brought up the rural area. Well, what are we doing in the rural area? And so I had recently had a call to Rochelle, Illinois, and just along that, demographic point, um, they're fairly close to the Chicago area. They're not quite a suburb. But one of the things that they discovered is that their school, they have the only private education school in the whole county
Wow.
in Illinois. So see, you can discover these kind of things through demographics, because you can bet anybody in that community, anybody in that county that wanted their kid to have private education, they were bringing them to that school. So you really can get that connection on how do we serve. So even rural congregations, I've heard of others that picked up on that idea that, we're a commuter town. We're a little, we're maybe 20 miles out from a big city, and we're a commuter town. But there was no daycare in that community. Or, in they most of the people would have to drop their kids off, not in their community, but on the way to where they were going to work, or if their work provided it or something like that. They had a very successful, and this was in my community learning group too. They had a very successful preschool because they were able to offer that service to, their community, because then they could keep their kids in the community while they went and did their, work and then came back and that way. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to kind of look at these demographics. And again, the district offers, Bill Guys would be happy. He's got so many different ideas and programs to help you get going in these. And the other thing too that, that I remember somebody asking at one of the E2 conferences is like, you don't have to bite the apple really big. Just take a little
Right.
bite in this. And this is one of those things that really helps. I remember in our visioning day, they were saying we should, you can do two at the most. That was what they were really. And we were kind of like, we wanted to do three. Well, at the end of the day, we were 6 hours into it, and we said, we're just doing the one.
Right.
Because
Right.
everybody wanted to go home, and it was more than enough for us to work on. It's just more of a just pinpoint work at this. If you get that one done, then go on to that next demographic or something along the lines of that. So yeah, those are just some, quick ideas that I had. Like I said, we've been very successful in engaging specific demographics and then also knowing our congregation, what kind of demographics live in our congregation that we can help them get plugged into activities that are taking place at St. Stephen's. So
Those are great examples, Pastor. Thank you so much for sharing that. It sounds like you're doing some wonderful things there, and I have no doubt it's because you put a lot of effort into understanding your community. I want to bring one more example to the table that really ties into um, making sure that you're asking the community what they need. The Flants Early Learning Center in North St. Louis City is in an area that is rife with gang violence, drugs, property crimes. It's an area that was once thriving and is now incredibly challenged. The folks that developed the Flants Early Learning Center actually took the time to go into the community and ask them what they need rather than telling them what they need. And the result of that is you have an organization that now has a beautiful building that is never vandalized. There's no spray paint, no broken windows in the center of this otherwise very desolate area. It's untouched by those things. There's no violence in that area. They have a health care facility, a clinic that tends to young people in the community that otherwise wouldn't have access to health services. They have a dentist that comes in once a month. They have a community garden that is open all the time to folks in the community that they can come over and pick fruit and vegetables and take that home. So provide some nutritional value. The playground is open all the time. There are no gates and locks associated with it. People in the community not only utilize it, but they preserve it and they protect it because they understand that the folks that built this, that lead this, have the community's best interest at heart, but they took the time to understand the community first. And so when we think about where the demographics fit in with the interview questions that we posted earlier, it's important to really understand that you're trying to figure out where the holes are, where the gaps are in the community services and how you can best help. That opens the door to so many ministry opportunities. And ultimately that's what we're trying to do. So
yeah,
let me
and we
walk
did.
through. Yeah, go
Oh,
ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, because we had one uh, question that kind of came up on the queue, and it just reminded me of a good point too. Like our outreach director, just along the idea too, just wanting to make sure we're being plugged into the community and those types of things. Um, because again, the more, I mean, St. Stephen has almost become outreach to a fault. I mean, we're just so
Right.
much into the community and those types of things. So, again, picking it up on one of the great things that the district is encouraging, the Shine event.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Lee and Robert, I can think of over the years, being one of the first and couple of years that were there, that was one thing that our outreach director did is he went to the community and said, hey, what project we need a project. What project can we do? And so since then, every one of our Shine events has been really connected to our community where we're working with community officials to sort of knock those things out. And, some of the bigger projects that we did, is like communities were like, hey, we have this resident that just his house is just, his property are just overrun. I mean, they're just the
Mhm.
neighbors are complaining, there's this, that, and the other thing. And so we've gone in on a couple of occasions like that and just transformed their yard, mostly just removing brush. And, several of us had to make trips to the hospital to get treated for poison ivy because we were inundated by it. But again, that was a way of connecting to the community with getting their needs. And so St. Stephen has done that. So even our last Shine event, and we get reminders on a monthly basis of going to go help clean in the cemetery, the local cemetery, and those types of things. And so yeah, so there's those kind of opportunities are there. You just have to, be willing to do a little bit of the work and going there. And the best thing about all of that is that I'm really not involved in that. These are my lay people that are driving and doing, these types of things for sure.
Sure. Lots of energy and excitement once that ball gets rolling. And you're right. That's a great question. Shine is a great opportunity to get your congregation really engaged in short-term community service projects that they don't have to stay short-term. They can grow into something much larger. And it's a fantastic opportunity to be out in the community doing wonderful things for the people around us. So let's talk about some final next steps here that you can take as a congregation. So we've obviously walked through the demographics and the opportunity to get that in your hands in several different formats so that you can start to really understand the hard data associated with your community. And then we've talked about understanding your community as well. So interviewing community leaders. We've given you some questions that you can spend some time talking about with them. And then this is really the next step here. It's really determining what your congregation excels at in ministry. So it gets back to the early part of this conversation where we talked about really pinpointing the vision and the resources, what you're good at as a congregation. What is your niche? Where do you fit into the community? And what ties do you have to the community? And how can you lean on those? Simply, this is easy. All you have to do is send me an email. I'm going to do the work for you. So you reach out to me, send me an email. I prefer that you copy your pastor. It's just important for them to know what's going on, and that's information that they will often find to be very helpful as well. So don't hesitate to reach out. Again, there's no cost for demographics at all. I'm happy to run them for you. We can turn them around pretty quickly. So don't hesitate to do that. I really want to encourage you, especially after you get those demographics, to sit down and start having the discussion with community leaders. You really need to understand where the gaps are in the community and how you can fit in with your ministry and help fill those needs. And then I really want, this is really important, and Pastor Joe talked about this for a minute. It's really important to identify and execute on one focus area. Put those resources and energy into something that you have identified that the congregation can be excited about, that you know can make an impact in the community. And even if not everyone in the congregation is jumping on board, if you get a small group that starts to run with something and they're excited about it and the energy is there and they see results, that's just going to bring in more and more people, more excitement. And then the community is going to know that you are there to help them. And ultimately, that leads to an opportunity to share the gospel, which is what we're really striving for. So don't spread yourselves too thin. Know your resources, know your limits. I'll also encourage you, if you get a couple of months down the road and it's not working out, it's not what you thought it was going to be in terms of whatever you've chosen to help support your community with, it's okay to change course, change direction. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to drag it on for 6 or 8 months where there's no impact. You lose the excitement and energy from your congregation, and then that sputters and it's a failure at that end. So we don't want to do that. We want to pick one thing that we think we're going to really be good at and impactful with. Pursue that. Don't be afraid to change directions if it doesn't work out quite as you expected. So with that, I just want to thank you for spending some time with us. And I hope that you gained some good information from this. This is my contact information. Don't hesitate to reach out by email or give me a call, and let's talk about how we can get some demographics to you for your congregation or your school, and even have a conversation with you about the resources we have at the Missouri District Office that can certainly help you expand ministry beyond the four walls of your congregation. So thanks again for joining. God bless you and God bless your ministry.